offs on those. Then I have an F7, and this is kind of an F7 augmented 9. This is an anticipation into here. So I'm going to go, I'll put the root, root, I'll put a gnarly 13th. No, I'll put the 5th here. And I got a nice triad. This is kind of an F minor triad here. There, and then I'll have, excuse me, I'll put a gnarly note, a 13th in there. And then the guys in the band, I think it was Wayne Bergeron and Sal Lozano, my two guys who will tell me what I'm doing. They call it a Frankenstein chord because it sounds very much like if you hear it by itself, it's kind of like out of a horror movie. And then this one, I told you, this is going to be a nice line that will just sound good by itself. It has this kind of, let me grab my soprano here. So I've got... Okay, that's the line. So this little line here sounds kind of good by itself. This has all been voiced out, so it'd be nice to hear a little bit of unison somewhere. And there's nothing wrong with writing unison, I'll tell you that. So I'm going to just copy this, give this to the trumpets, and I'm going to move this guy up here. He can play it up there. I mean, he can play it down an octave, but I'm going to let my bones do that. Copy that and move that down here like that. That's nice. So then here, I will have, copy the rest over. And I have a chromatic movement going A flat down to G. And so what I'll do is put my tie on here. And then, so I'll go D, A. So here's a series of fourths. And then my favorite, add the 13th, which is an E. Here's the all-important third in the G chord. Here's the all-important 7th in the G chord. And I'm going to move chromatically down to those. So here's an E flat down to D. And then here's an B flat down to A. Here's an F. I'll do these real quick. C, G flat. Going down the 3rd, important 7th. Here's the 13th. There we go. And so I've got that voiced out chromatically moving down. So it's an A flat chord moving down to G. Then I have another G chord here. I'll do... you know, there's a billion different ways to voice these out, and anybody who's done this before can come up with there's the Count Basie method, which always works. I use that quite a bit if I'm doing kind of a stock standard chart. There's a lot of ways of doing it. This is the way I do it, so I'm not telling you to do it this way. It's just a way to do it. So here's one of those things where I created some chromatic movement. Here, let me move this over here so you can, it's a little better, easier to see. Created some chromatic movement where I call this an A flat chord. This is the 13th of the A flat chord. So it makes this chromatic movement, and this isn't a chromatic movement, but it's kind of going the opposite direction here. So I'm going to call this an A flat chord. So I'll put a C, which is the 3rd. I'll put an A flat, which is the root. I'll put a C of the 3rd. Put a B flat, which is the 9th, and then here's the important 7th. Then here's my G chord again, which I can go 5th, down to 4th to the 9th. So again, these are fourths. And then I'll put the 13th, my favorite 13th, yay! 3rd, 7th, put my rest in. Here's a D flat chord, moving chromatically down, so I call it D flat moving down into the C7 chord. Let me voice my C7 chord out so I know what notes I'm using. Here's down to 4th, which is the 9th, down to 4th, which is the 13th. Here's left hand voicing 9, 7, 3. Oh, I don't have to put a natural there. This is in G of F. So I'm going to move everybody chromatically down to that. B flat, and then D or E flat going down to D. B, which is still left over, and then that goes down to B flat. Little courtesy accidental. F going down to E. So that's good. And then I'm going to use, again, another unison line. So this had a ba-da-da-da-da-da, and this has kind of its own little, let me play it again for you so you can hear it. Let's see, I'll start here. Hear that ba-da-da-da-da, that's kind of a really strong line. So let's do that just unison. And whoop, and then I'll bring this one down. Nice to have the trumpets sound good in octaves, but usually the second, the third, and fourth are going to be down an octave. And then my trombones can play that, and so I might do that with my. Well, I'll give my third trombone a break because he's down on that note. He's so low, so I'm gonna I'll put it there. Although that's never stopped me before. So here's my turnaround, and this is. I'm going to use a series of fourths, and this is a D7 chord. I'm going to add some extensions on it. Here's the augmented 5, here's the augmented 9, here's that, here's the 7th, here's the augmented 5, and now I'm going to add some rests here, and then I'm going to add, here's my G7 chord. This is an anticipation in the G, so down a fourth, which is a ninth, down a fourth, which is the 13th, or the important third, the root. I'm getting pretty low here, so I'm going to not go too far. I don't like to write below the D here. I mean, some people do it. You can do it if you're writing fifths, but if you're harmonizing stuff out, I try not to write below the D. Sometimes I can do a D flat or whatever. So here is my rests, and I have my rest there. So this is an anticipation of C7, but it's the augmented 5. So I'm going to do augmented 5, augmented 9, plus 9 plus 5 chord. Whee! So there's a series of fourths. Here is the augmented 9. Ooh, find it there. There. The all-important 7th, the all-important 3rd. And then finally, to get out of this, I'm going to do an F7. And I'm going to do a funny chord here. I'm going to do a I've got and then this last chord I'm going to do like a, which is just a nice easy chord, a chord a whole step higher, which is like a G chord. And I don't know, do I want to add the augmented 9th with that? Not today. I get said Frankenstein chord stuff. They'll yell at me at that. I hate getting yelled at. And so here we go. So here's the voicing all put together. So my trumpets are basically a series of fourths. Fourth trumpet is down an octave from the first trumpet. My bass trombone is playing the roots with some chromatic stuff, with some just imaginative stuff. A few unison lines here and important lines. And then my left-hand voicings for piano are kind of in the trombones. And the trombones have the thirds and the sevenths, and I try to get a lot of 13ths in there as much as possible. So that's how that works. Now, the next video, I'm going to put the articulations on, and then we'll voice out the saxophones as well. Okay, here we go.